Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 7 Stories Up at SNFL. Tonight, we are going to have Molly McGhee and Nia T. Evans discuss Jonathan Abernathy, You Are Kind. Yay! We are delighted to have you all joining us tonight at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. My name is Liz Baldwin. I'm a librarian, and I'll be hosting tonight. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making programs like this evening's event possible. I would also like to encourage you to visit NYPL's website and take a look at the upcoming 7 Stories Up programs. We would love to have you join us here again. And as a librarian, I would be remiss if I didn't urge you to also get a library card while you're here. Any staff member at any of the information desks on any floors would be happy to sign you up today. And I also have to let you know, the 3 public library systems in New York City are facing massive budget cuts, upwards of $58 million for the next fiscal year. So if you have any time at all, please visit investinlibraries.org, sign a letter, send it to City Hall, and let Eric Adams know that keeping libraries fully funded keeps New York City running. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Molly McGhee is from a cluster of unincorporated towns outside of Nashville, Tennessee. She completed her MFA in fiction at Columbia University, where in addition to receiving a Chair's Fellowship, she taught in the undergraduate creative writing department. She has worked in the editorial departments of McSweeney's, The Believer, Noon, Farrar, Straus, and Giroux, and Tor. Currently living in Brooklyn, her work has appeared in the Paris Review. Jonathan Abernathy You Are Kind is her debut novel. Nia T. Evans is a freelance journalist based in New York City. She writes about race, politics, and culture. Her writing has appeared in Boston Review, Slate, Prism, and Electric Literature, among others. Without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Molly McGhee and Nia T. Evans.
Wow, we have a lot to talk about. This is a book about capitalism, about extraction, about debt, about labor, about what is real.
Really light topics.
Really like what the world needs right now. Just some light
Fluff.
some fluff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fluff in this book. But when we were talking backstage, you were working in publishing when you wrote this.
Yeah.
This fluffy book, this
Yes.
light book.
Very warm.
Can you talk to me about how your working life informed this book and the premise?
Yeah. Has anyone ever been miserable at a job?
Raise your hand, raise it high.
Yeah, me too. Not that, hey, I'm not saying it was the publishing job that I was miserable at. I'm not going on record saying that. But I was stuck in a cyclical grind where I sort of saw maybe I don't want to be dramatic, but maybe saw no end in sight, and so it was in 2020, and I sort of wrote this book as a way to get to the other side, and so unfortunately I put a lot of really intense feelings in there, which sometimes people are very mad at me about. They're like, you know what? I had to take a really long shower after reading this and think about my life. And I was like, I'm so sorry. They're like, how dare you? I was, what was I doing? I was helping authors at the time, publish their life and soul. And I was doing it from a side of the desk where I had to make some decisions that I really wasn't a fan of. And that got me thinking about all the people put in compromised positions and what that looks like on sort of a psychological level.
And that's Jonathan Abernathy.
And that's Jonathan Abernathy. And there you go.
So this is a guy who is drowning in debt. And I feel like drown isn't a good enough word. He is being crushed.
Yeah, he's trying to pretend the walls are not closing in.
Yeah.
He's like, this room is the same size as it was 3 minutes ago.
Right.
Meanwhile, just slowly crushing him.
Yeah, he is being squeezed from within.
Mm-hmm.
He's also very earnest.
He's a sweetie.
He's very earnest. He wants to be loved. He talks to himself. He does a lot of positive self-talk. He reminds himself that he is kind, that he's loved, that he's valuable, that he's capable, that he can do his job.
Normal stuff.
Yeah, the things that we all do.
Yeah.
And you think he gets a lifeline in the beginning. He gets a job and he is going to infiltrate the dreams of America's workers. He is going to help be a part of this project that scrubs stress and pain and anxiety.
Takes the bad parts of living away.
Yeah. And there are two lines that if someone were to ask me, like, what is this book about? To me, two lines that really capture it. At one point, Jonathan Abernathy is sitting in a training to do this work, and he sees someone who's writing like notes from the training. And she writes, government-sponsored indentured servitude with some hearts.
Little hearts.
With some little hearts next to it. Some little hearts next to it. And then there's another moment where Jonathan, along with all of these other workers, are sort of being sent into these people's consciousness. And their boss says, go forth, collect the debris of the soul. So can you talk about that? Can you talk about this work of collecting the debris of the soul? How did you come to it? And why is it important in this book?
Memory and sleeping are really interesting to me, like on a scientific sort of level. They're interconnected. So, you know, the way when we process our memories, it's often in sleep. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is how our memories shape our perspective, and our memories are not always necessarily capital T true, right? So this book to me was really an exercise in sort of thinking about how encompassing a perspective can be and how alienating it can be to be like deep in one without sort of a lifeline to other people. So much about this book is about an attempt at community and sort of the Jonathan's failure to build his own community because he can't see outside of himself. And he thinks that this job where he's going in and sort of deciding what other people should or shouldn't remember about their lives, it gives him this false sense of power, but actually he has no idea who they are or what their lives comprise of.
But he's really ready to be there.
He is really ready to be there, and he's really ready to do a good job. Capital G, capital J.
A great job. Let's talk about him a little bit more, because before I met you, I was on Twitter, and I saw a tweet by someone named Molly McGhee, and she was talking about how she has this book coming out, and her exes saw that she had a book coming out, and they were freaking out. And she was getting emails, multiple, from her exes. One of them I had to write down here. Quote, heard you have a book coming out. I assume it's about me. Send it to me. I want to read it.
Why did I think that was charming at the time?
It's not charming.
It's not charming.
It's not
It's
charming.
a little sociopathic.
And that went viral. And I remember being like, ooh, I like this book. I put it in my cart. And then I was lucky enough to be able to talk to you. But like, talk to me about Jonathan. Like, we've talked a little bit about this man. He really wants to do good. He doesn't have family. He's sort of thrown into this world. He wants to please himself, the people around him. He wants to be part of something, even if that something's a very ominous thing that other people around him are sort of like, that seems a little fishy. Yeah. Like, what do you think drives him? And over the course of the book, you know, he ends in a place. There are 4 different parts, right? He's dreaming, he's awake, he's sleeping. Talk to me about him and why he is sort of like the structure of this book.
You know, I was really interested in, this is going to make me sound like a really big nerd. I'm sorry, y'all. But I'm really interested in sort of heroic traditions, and especially the way they center around the masculine and the sort of story of masculinity that we are fed, and especially the sort of tropes that come with it, you know, providing this idea of like success at all costs, like proving that you're a worthy human being, and the really performative elements of just existing, I think can be encapsulated. What do I want to say? Encapsulated?
Yeah.
There we go. Encapsulated by sort of American masculinity right now and the ideal around it. And Jonathan, to me, is really an exploration of the sort of logical end point that lifestyle brings you to. A lot of our young dudes are being faced with the fact that they're not the center of things anymore, and they're struggling and they can't adjust their narratives around it. And ultimately, like, their inability to adjust their understanding and sort of think about the existence of other people is causing them to live a very lonely life.
And the centrality of capital.
Right,
that,
exactly. Like how it is built off of male labor and male loneliness and male exploitation.
Yeah. That relates to the women of this novel are so rich and complex. And I think when you meet Jonathan Abernathy, he seems sort of like a simpleton. He's just this guy who wants to do great things and be really loved. And you have Kai, who is his boss, who he works with, who has an amazing story. And then his neighbor.
Right.
And her daughter. Right?
And Timmy.
So you have like really women in different stages of their lives, going through really hard things. Can you talk about how gender operates in this book and what those characters bring out in the story and add to it?
I'm really interested in gender as a concept. I grew up in the South and the Bible Belt, where gender is a really big thing, and it's a really performative.
Capital G gender.
Yes, capital G gender. Like, ma'am, let me hold this door open for you.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, thank you, sir. And so I grew up very aware of it and how I did and didn't fit into it. And moving to the North, I thought I would be moving away from some of the more gendered elements of existence. And I sort of realized that it's just as gendered here as it is, in Tennessee. It's just done very differently. It's performed differently. So I was really interested in sort of capturing the different performances of gender in the novel, and also sort of capturing the truth that I notice in my life, which is that often it's women who are trying to bridge the gender gap and sort of explain or help someone across the aisle.
Bring them in.
Break it down, sort of teach them, help them see the ways that this performance is being exploited by others. And I really wanted to sort of capture that. I mean, I'm very interested in sort of capturing truths that are beneath the surface, that we sort of see but can't see, but we can catch in the periphery of our eye. And so that's one of the reasons I chose to work in sort of a surrealist mode.
Yeah. We have to talk about debt.
Oh, no.
There's just a lot to talk about when it comes to debt.
Money, dude.
A lot. And I think what this book does so well is it deconstructs the logics of debt, I think. And also it feels like a hydra, like multiple hydras.
Right.
Jonathan, when he gets this job, is able to think about all of the ways he will not be eaten by the hydra just yet.
He's given relief.
Yeah, it's still there.
It's still there, but hey, he's a little farther from it than he was before.
He has brief moments of relief. Can you talk about how your experience with debt informed this book?
I think debt is, for those of us who have it, we know that it's sort of the eater of the mind. It takes up all of our attention. It's always sort of looming above us as the capital F future that we've usually brought upon ourselves due to sort of like a lack of knowledge at the time. So it, in a way, can really symbolize sort of a lot of things. It's a very rich metaphor for sort of, I think, the human existence, right? What do we do in the present moment so that we can get to the next moment? And then how in the next moment do we get to the next moment, and so on and so forth. I personally have quite a bit of debt. I have a lot of student loans.
Same.
Yeah. Maybe a bad decision in retrospect, but hey, I'm sitting on the stage, so I don't know. I pay my bills. I think it's tough because it's ultimately like debt is a type of gambling, and like gambling, there are major dangers, but there's also sort of a lack of state interference, you know? And so you can get in really tight spots, especially where student loans are concerned or credit card debt is concerned. And I know that's the truth for, I mean, most Americans. Most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They're just trying to get by. And that was my experience growing up. And I don't always see that represented necessarily in fiction. I think probably because it's sad, right? We don't want to like go there. It's a little depressing. But it was important to me to try to capture the psychological truths and the way debt can shape a life.
Yeah. How do you think Jonathan Abernathy as a character understands his debt?
I think he thinks of it in the way that we think of natural disasters, right? You know, like, okay, there's a tornado warning. How bad is it really? Do we need to get into the basement today, or can we just sort of keep doing our thing? And when the disaster is bad, it's bad. But a lot of times the sort of worry around it we know it can be overwrought because we live day to day with it ourselves, and we make it manageable just by existing with it. It becomes mundane. But it's a mundanity that is still, in a way, life-threatening, and it just takes one bad call to sort of end up on the other side, where you're like, oh, why didn't I evacuate? Why didn't I, was there a way out? Like, maybe if I did something different, I could have, you know, figured it out and avoided all this suffering. But in a way, there's an inevitability to it and an unpredictableness to it as well.
I want to talk a little bit about sort of like the work that Abernathy is doing, this collecting the debris of the soul. There's like infrastructure in this world, right? Like there's technology and tools, and there are ways that this information is being gathered and stored and analyzed. What inspired you while you were building this world and building this sort of work that Abernathy engages in? How were you able to decide the rules of infiltrating dreams and who gets that information and what they do with it? What was your process around creating that?
I was really inspired by the work of David Graeber, especially his works Debt and a book of his called Bullshit Jobs, which is just a great book. I was working when I was writing this in sort of corporate hierarchical a corporate hierarchical structure, like an intensely capital H hierarchical structure. And what it sort of revealed to me was how protected and guarded certain levels of information are, and how linked information is and the sharing of information to sort of our conceptions of ourselves, our conceptions of power, our conceptions of ego. And, you know, when you're in a workforce of any kind, you realize quickly, like, the manager knows 25% of the picture, and the manager's manager knows 45%, and so on, all the way up to the top. And it's like a game of telephone. And I think capturing that sort of, the sort of confused days that often many of us experience in work, where we're only doing a part of a thing, right? We're part of the industrial workers sort of movement. It's like, it's actually very confusing and very isolating, and we often don't know what's going on. And when I see workforces depicted in fiction, I often see sort of this like idyllic depiction of, you know, even the assistant knows why they're doing X and they have an opinion on it. But I mean, sometimes sucking up dreams is just sucking up dreams, and you're like, I have no idea.
Just doing it.
I'm doing it because I was told, and I have to learn through inference that I'm doing it wrong or doing it right.
Yeah. I can say I didn't have terrible dreams after reading this book. but I did.
glad.
I didn't. But I did feel like the idea of violation, I didn't feel violated because my dreams aren't being infiltrated. But I think the idea that corporations are, right, like without their employees' knowledge, taking what I think of as sacred, like your subconsciousness, something that is like deeply yours and ideally not for extraction. I was very upset
Yeah.
by that idea, which I think is like the point.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately,
yeah, like talk to me about, I'm really interested, like the idea of like nothing being sacred. Like in this book, like it feels like that subconsciousness, that extraction is just like another layer of violation that comes with
right.
the working world.
Well, if everything is for sale, right? If everything is for sale and the price of living is always increasing, does it not logically conclude that even the sacred eventually will be sold?
I'm going to let that one sit for a minute.
I think like none of us have a choice, and we have to sell our sacred selves every day. And that is the tragedy of being alive right now in this time. It's a fucking bummer. But I mean, all of us have the opportunity to build a future where that's not true. And so when we talk about it, when we talk about sort of the ways that actually like privacy is important to the human experience, and though we sort of live in the panopticon of all panopticons, all of us deserve like to have a private self and an individual life. And how can we protect it? Because when profit's on the line, and it's the decision of whether we're going to sell our private self or, you know, have a home, the home kind of seems more important at the time, right? So there's nothing, I mean, it's a really sad reality that we live in. But I personally believe that sort of showing the way it's not just like, we're not just talking about sort of privacy as like an idea or a cliche or whatever. We're talking about privacy in a way that is inherent to personhood.
As a right.
As a right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think it's a right. But I recognize that that is a political opinion because not everyone thinks privacy is a right.
I'm still sitting with that one.
I like the internet, you know, I don't know. I grew up on it. So it's like I've been thinking about privacy and the performance of self since I dialed into AOL, you know?
I mean, that's social media. It's performance.
And for some people, it's the only way to get ahead.
Or even connect.
Or even connect. Or
like
to
poor
be
Jonathan
allowed in the
Abernathy.
rooms. Yeah.
To feel like you're a part of something bigger.
Right. And this is his only way to be included in anything because nobody thinks he's worthwhile.
Yeah.
And we see him, you know, throughout the book. So, yeah, at the end of the book, we're like, maybe you aren't worthwhile. You know, I don't know. But we do also see him as a human being. And I like to think that when you get to the end, you can step out of the judgment you may feel for him or yourself and recognize that his life is sacred because he's alive. And it doesn't have to be justified by what he's done or who he's loved or how he has managed to come off on the world, but it's just sacred just because it is.
I don't want to spoil the ending, and I'm not going to.
Yeah, should we do it?
I'm not going to. But I think that Jonathan Abernathy starts this book desperate for connection, and I think he ends the book in a different place.
I think he realizes that he was taking some of his connections for granted. And I would say that's sort of I really was interested in inverting the hero's journey. So it wasn't about sort of getting to the end and looking at all you've accomplished, but rather getting to the end and looking at all the people whose lives that you were able to touch and how that, to me at least, as your very political author, was sort of the truth that I wanted to depict.
Do you think your politics or even your voice as a writer shifted over the course of writing this very fluffy book?
I think my mom passed away when I was writing it in 2020 from the pandemic. And so it was a time when government decisions were directly affecting my life. And I had to keep going to work and keep performing sort of this public persona, keep moving things forward, keep making sure things were produced. I don't know if a part of me changed while I was writing this, but I do think I was able to reckon with and sort of accept some of the philosophical truths I was grappling with at the time, and sort of come to terms with, I don't know, adulthood, like what it means to be a person and what it means to love other people and what it means to sort of consciously decide every day that even though the world is bad and other people can hurt you, it's worth loving them anyways, because the love itself is their reward. So maybe this book made me a cheesy motherfucker. I don't know.
Yeah, for a pretty thoughtful, but also a book that's grappling with a lot of hard things, it sounds like it gave you some peace.
It gave
in the
me
process.
something to do through my grief, and it gave me a reason to get up every morning, and that was what I needed at the time.
How does it feel now? Like, how has the reception been? How has it been sharing this book with the world?
It feels crazy. And, you know, when I was writing it, I had written a book before that it never saw the light of day. So I'm going to be real, y'all. I did not think this one would either. And so to be here at the New York Public Library it's like, I feel like I'm in a dream for the last several months.
A good dream.
A good dream, but also kind of scary because I'm like, what's going on? No, nobody's ever listened to me before. Now you guys are looking at me. What the hell? So that part and coming to terms with that has been really like one of the biggest honors in my life, but also one of the scariest things I've ever had to do. Because it's like, wow, I'm so lucky to have readers. And to me, I'm a huge reader. And so I feel that responsibility because when you're reading, like to me, that's the most like amazing thing. So
that's a lot of time
and
attention.
A lot of time. Books are quite a lot of money. It's like 20, 30 hours, you know, and you are giving me that time of your life. And it's up to me to make sure that's spent wisely. So I feel a lot of responsibility, and that's kind of scary, but it's also, it feels so special, and I wouldn't go back to the way it was before. But I also am learning to sort of like, let's just say there have been some awkward moments. I put my foot in my mouth a lot because I keep acting like,
ooh, what do you say?
I keep just being like, well, I'm an idiot. And then people are like, actually, like, I read your book. Do you really think that you're stupid? Because
do you?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, who doesn't? Imposter syndrome, you know what I mean?
Well, sometimes.
Yeah, it's like, you're like, who am I? I'm just a dumbass guy hanging out, living in the world.
Jonathan Abernathy.
Yeah,
sweet
I
baby.
guess. That's my baby.
Poor sweet baby.
My baby. So I think, you know, that part's been really strange to sort of just be a person and then be on stage with lights on you feels totally weird, especially after sitting in a room alone for so long to make this. But I also feel like so lucky to be here. So
we talked about this backstage a little bit, but since Molly told me it was Library Week, which makes sense.
Someone should tell Eric Adams.
Someone should tell him a lot of things, including that. But it's Library Week. This book is about, I mean, there's a lot of extraction happening, but there's also a lot of collection happening and archiving happening. And this book is really, it's quite poignant actually that we're here at the New York Public Library, because I would say it happened somewhat in a bit of an insidious way in this book, but this is a book that's about collection and what it means to preserve. And so I both am curious about that act of collection in this book, but also like how you do see this relating to the work of libraries and collection and building that record.
I am such a nerd for information and for libraries in general. I just think they're amazing.
They are.
They're amazing. And I'm really specifically interested in sort of the history of information, how it's disseminated, how it's collected, what we decide is important to know in the future, sort of what we give space to, right? Because space is money. And the ways that libraries and archives can, in a way, symbolize power structures very poignantly, because we can see what is being acquired or
remembered.
Yes, what is being remembered, what is being collected, what is being taken care of, what is being stewarded, and how what we decide of all the information we have as a society is allowed to be public, because there are public libraries and then there are private libraries. And this is true of archives as well. And the sort of information you can find on either end of the spectrum is fascinating to look at from a research perspective for me. So I was very interested in sort of like extending the logic of thinking, okay, even corporations have libraries, they have archives, but what is informationally important to them to pass down? And it's really about things that can make them money in the present. And we live in such a sort of deep capitalist system. I think that does make its way into libraries. I mean, you're seeing a backlash, and I have a really good friend who was a librarian for a long time, and she ended up having to quit because of the transphobia at her local branch. And the books that she was picking for her branch were being targeted by, I don't want to say activists because I don't know what they're acting on in the area, but sort of like moms who really cared about like capital S ideas of like safety, I guess. And the sort of like decision of what was allowed to be publicly accessible and what was normal was really affecting her life. And I know there are a lot of librarians right now who are really like fighting that struggle on the ground, who are being targeted, who are doing the amazing work of saying like, this is important. And even if it is dangerous for me to be the shepherd of this knowledge, it's knowledge that matters. And so I am willing to steward it. And I just think that's really brave. And I'm interested in kind of like how libraries, in a way, the public library system in America, which is just unlike anything else in the world and is amazing.
I think all the time, like we wouldn't be able to build something like that today. Like there isn't the same, we don't have the same abilities or will or capacities, but like it's such a marvel that we have public libraries.
To me, it is the one of the only things still that makes me very proud to be like American, capital A, is like actually the library system and our belief that everyone should have access to books is truly beautiful and an experiment that has never before really been done in history, and has affected me. It's the reason I'm here on the stage, is because I had access to public libraries growing up. So to archives for me are very personal, and like sort of how we decide who has access to that information, and how we often don't tell the archivists themselves what they're stewarding. Really, I mean, our whole world is built off of information. So
how do you think that operates in the book?
Well, the entire structure of the book is built around Jonathan realizing that what he's collecting isn't just being thrown away, it's actually being collected, and that collection has a purpose. And so the information he's gathering does have a negative impact on the world. And then he has to sort of come to terms with what that means morally and ethically, and also ask himself if he can really afford to have a moral and ethical viewpoint on the matter at hand, because of the systems he lives in.
Folks should get their questions ready because we're going to start doing questions in a few minutes. But can we talk about the acknowledgements page?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's so unique. I just haven't seen anything like it. Some people in their acknowledgements sort of just write a list of beautiful thank yous, which is wonderful. But you specifically, in part because you've worked in publishing, decided to pull together a list of all of the people who made this book a book. Can you talk about why you did that, and also the people who did make this book the book?
Yeah. I was a publishing worker for a while, and so I had the experience of being, sort of the invisible hands that bring a book into existence. And when you're working on a book, no matter where you are on the process, there's this weird amalgamation that happens where that book kind of becomes you and you become the book. And I really wanted to honor the people who I wouldn't necessarily get to meet and say thank you to individually by putting them in my acknowledgements pages. So I wanted to honor the publicity assistants, the marketers, the sales reps, the agents, all the people who, if they do get credit, their credit is usually obfuscated, so we don't know what type of credit they're necessarily getting. But I wanted to do sort of a credits page where they got the sort of call out and recognition that they deserved, because this book wouldn't exist without them. I mean, it wouldn't exist without someone in production who is willing to do like 100 emails back and forth with the printer about black ink samples. Thank you for that person, you know? And I also wanted to thank my teachers. And it was really important to me to list out my teachers because I'm a teacher now. And being a teacher, in retrospect, like all of my teachers amaze me because being a teacher is kind of hard, but they all made it look so easy. And I wanted to get that on paper so that they could have it and know that they made this thing with me too. I also wanted to provide, I'm not saying I don't know where my career is going, but I wanted to provide some monetary incentive to the people who bought this hardcover copy when I'm just getting started. So I'm not going to stop anytime soon, and I hope I've decided to just put my acknowledgements in the first printing of the hardcover edition so that if I go on one day, hopefully that will be worth something and it'll be a collector's copy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I just want to, I can't pay them, but I want to pay them,
That point around I wanted to thank my teachers has me thinking about teaching in the book, right? Because Jonathan is new. He's learning how to do a new job. And he's being mentored by Kai.
Right, and she doesn't have a lot of patience.
She doesn't have a lot of patience.
For good reasons.
For reasons that are valid. But yeah, can you just talk about that idea of mentorship and like how it shows up in the book and also how it relates to your experience?
Yeah, I think teaching is just one of the core truths of being a person. We're all taught and we all teach each other just in existence. And I think like, in books, people always just know stuff, right? They're always just they just know how to do things. I feel personally like I don't know how to do anything. And I'm always learning. So I wanted to sort of capture learning is such a strange state to be in because we're always assessing what we know and what we don't know and what we need to know to move forward and how we can acquire that knowledge and if we have a knowledge gap at all or if we're just being anxious and insecure. There's like a lot of sort of things involved with learning how to be a person. And all of the characters in the book are teaching each other what it means to be a person, even if they don't realize they are.
Everyone is learning. Everyone is learning, especially Jonathan Abernathy in his mission to like connect and be a part of something.
Yeah, he's learning why he can't connect.
Yeah.
And then the people around him are learning like, Kai is learning as she moves forward that actually she can't do life alone. And even though it is frustrating having to teach people, so unfortunately she's got to pony up and teach them, She has to teach them how to respect her because they don't know and they haven't been taught. And in that way, she has to sort of she has to make some really, really hard decisions. It's interesting because we're talking about just this book, which is just one side of the sort of perspective decahedron, right? But when I was writing it, I wrote out the perspectives of the other characters. So in my head, I have like a story for Kai that you guys don't have access to, and a story for Rhoda that you don't have access to, or a story for the director Penn that I know but isn't included and was consciously not included because the book is just about the iceberg of Jonathan's consciousness.
Well, now I want those other books. What about Timmy?
Yeah.
Rhoda's daughter. Timmy
Love
has
her. Yeah, she has one too.
has a story. Okay. I do want to open it up for questions. I want to create some space. We've got 2 microphones. And if you don't have questions, I will keep asking questions. But I also teach sometimes, so I also know how to be quiet for a minute and let you guys think. Mm-hmm. So if you have a question, there's a microphone waiting for you.
Hey, Molly.
Hey.
As someone who, and maybe I'm projecting this onto the book, but like as someone who's raised by like a non-biological father, like I felt like some of Jonathan's underlying character motivations that like, because also you just mentioned that there's these character bios maybe in larger histories of the characters that we don't get to see in the book necessarily, that like how much of his motivation is also feeling like some of his responsibility in a longer future is to step up as maybe a father figure in Rhoda and Timmy's life.
Absolutely. I think sort of anxiety around patriarchal expectations and his own sort of experience with them is one of the key factors of the book. And there's a chapter in the middle that sort of is a core pivot point for it, where he sort of has to come to terms with some of the darker elements of fatherhood and parenting, and the responsibilities that you take on when you have a life that you're responsible for.
I feel like there's a lot of parent perspective in here. Like, how did you dive into that? Like, there's a lot of parents carrying some really heavy loads.
Yeah, I think I'm really impressed by all the parents that I grew up around. They held a lot of great, I respect my elders. I don't know what you want me to say. So I think for me, I just was always the kid in the room that was watching, right? And paying attention. And I always knew a little bit more than I should. So I always knew Mrs. Casey and Mr. Casey were on the routes, and that was kind of affecting how their kids were experiencing it, and
Every
it was
little
changing
writer
the barbecue.
starts like that. Every little writer is just a little weirdo in the corner who watches everyone really closely and knows exactly what's going on, even though they weren't told what was going on.
I was very nosy. And then I also, when I was in college, one of my jobs was, this is really strange. I don't have a child myself, but when I was in college, I got a job doing like an Ask Polly, where you're someone's writing
like
in
the
for
advice column.
Yeah, an advice column. But I was on an advice column where I was answering expecting mothers.
Very presumptuous.
Yes. So it was
what
like
to expect when you're expecting.
Yes,
by
it
Molly
was
McGhee.
crazy. It was like it was a marketing job that I got, and my boss was just like, we're going to bill you as this type of guy. And I was like, I'm not. And they were like, but you know how to write and you know how to research, so do a good job. And I was getting all of these questions that were like, motherhood is really, it is like, unless you're in it, you have no idea what it's like. I know, even though I'm not in it. Because it is one of the most isolating experiences you can have as an American. And when I realized this was when these women were writing into me and writing about these really serious realities that they were having to grapple with, and how their husband couldn't meet them there because he had no conception of sort of the challenges that they were facing.
To your point about the women opening the door, being the bridge, bringing them in.
And I got some really harrowing questions through that column, and you can really tell that like a lot of elements of motherhood are not discussed, aren't told until you're in it. There's a lot of like psychological stuff that other people put on you that you don't get to be in control of. And I was answering these columns. I did that for I wrote probably 3 advice letters a week for about a year and a half.
Wow.
I know. Where it's like, they're like, my husband is no longer attracted to me and he's the love of my life and I don't know what to do. And I have to be like, yeah, that's a really hard position to be in. And there's no correct answer. And you're going through this right now. And what's sadder is there's a long tradition of women who have gone through this. But here's how they got through it. And I think you can get through it too. You just had a child. That's the hardest thing anyone can do. So if you can do that, you can do this. And it was a lot of, really, really personal talking to people about their biggest fears, where they were anonymous, so they could be really truthful about them. There was one, I remember, it stayed with me. It was a woman who was like, my sister and I have always been close, but I am pregnant now, and she's been told that she's infertile. And there's a bridge between us that I have no idea how to cover the gap. And my child's due soon, and I want her to be part of its life, but I don't know how to like emotionally support her while she's going through this devastating thing. And what's worse, I remember the lady was like, I didn't think I wanted kids for a really long time, and my sister was the one who always wanted them. So when you're being invited to not only witness, but comment on people's really, really deeply interpersonal, emotional family journeys, you're like, oh my God, there's so much of life that we just keep from each other. And there's so much that we just carry alone and that we can't put voice to. And as a fiction writer, I, of course, am very interested in those things.
How old were you when you were answering these letters?
I was like 19. Yeah.
Shit is crazy.
I know. It was crazy.
There are parents who were advised and supported, who were getting more emotional support from you than they were from their partners.
Oh, I took my job very seriously.
Oh,
I was like,
God.
This is really important. I think this is one of the most important things I'm ever going to do.
I mean, it probably was.
I learned a lot about just like what it means to be a depressed person. It's just crazy. And I wrote a book. No, it's good. I mean, I feel grateful for that opportunity because I feel like now there's this period that I'm going through where I feel like I can really support my friends who are having some key narratives that they really like clung to broken, right? Like not everybody falls in love and not everyone has kids and not everyone, has a job they like. Not all of us have good relationships with our parents. Not all of us wake up every day thrilled to be here. But that doesn't mean existence is bad necessarily. And I feel really grateful that I got to learn that at such a young age, because now I'm in a position where I get to help my peers.
Any other questions?
Hi, I really liked your book, Molly. Thank you so much. I don't know if it's really a question, but I just noticed the theme of choice, and I felt a lot of throughout the book getting frustrated at Jonathan's choices, but it didn't really feel like he had a lot of choices. I was wondering what your perspective on that is. Because it's kind of like this, is he a free spirit? Is he a free being to choose?
Does he have free will?
Yeah.
And we see there are several, I think what you're referencing is there are several moments in the book where the narrator intervenes and kind of tells us the alternate choices that he could have had. I think all of us tell ourselves that we have no choice, right? And it's that story that often makes it so we don't have a choice. We could get really deep into sort of like cool nerd neuroscience brain shit, like, you know, the way we make decisions and the way our pathways form, and how, you know, as we get into habits of doing things a certain way, it becomes harder as we get older to break out of those habits because those neural connections are no longer active. But I was really interested in interrogating Jonathan's habit of saying that he had no choice to do things, and showing on a narrative level that his lack of choice was, in a way, a type of choice. But maybe one, I don't know if we can avoid it or not. That's the thing. If you figure out the answer to free will versus determinism, please let me know.
Let us all know.
Let's know. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I'm really interested in it as like a concept. And right now I'm sort of leaning towards this like quantum idea of free will and determinism, where both are true at the same time, and both being true creates a third thing, which is life as we know it. But because both are true, it's almost incomprehensible for us to separate them or measure them. I don't know if I'm committed to that idea or not yet, but I have been wondering. So if anybody knows, give me a call.
Great question.
Hey, Molly. I was just wondering, as you were finishing your book, as you were writing it, and you were really enmeshed in the world that you had created, was there anything that you found kind of flickering at the edges where you had to draw a line and say, that's not in this book, and I'm pulling back, but I'm going to come back for you later?
Yes, yeah.
What was like flickering at the edges for you while you were writing this?
Yeah, I think when I was an editor for a while, and one of the things I would tell my authors is that, like, you know, authors, we have this tendency, we get so excited that someone just wants us to write one book, so we're like, let's put everything in there. But actually, like, I think the art of a book is keeping really firm lines about what stays out. So for me, there was a lot of, I could have gone so hard on sort of theory, politics, more systems, but I made the choice for it to be a character-driven, perspective-driven novel, specifically with a very psychological sort of lens. And there's like a long tradition of this, and it's one of my favorite book types. But wow, there was a point in time where I was like, I could write the greatest system novel of all time if I just had 10 years. So there was a deliberate choice to sort of make it in the outer city rather than a rooted, actually named city. There was a deliberate choice to sort of keep it in the surreal, so that it could work as an allegory or a metaphor, which are some of, you know, the story forms that I grew up with. I grew up evangelical, so those type of stories really shaped me, and I really wanted this book to sort of have that feeling. But wow, there was a point in the drafts where I was like, if only I could write a 20-page screed about student loans. I would.
I want to hear more about the stories that you grew up with that inspired this. And even like the music. Like, what music were you listening to when you were writing this?
My grandfather passed away in 2020 as well, but he was a country songwriter, and he wrote some, and also, bless him, a horrible alcoholic. And so he had this sort of experience of almost, quote unquote, making it. And so a lot of sort of the themes of country music. I grew up in Nashville. I grew up right down the street from Johnny Cash's house and Conway Twitty. And the sort of themes of country music are really, to me, very, very interesting because there are, before, you know, the contemporary country model, like I'm talking 20th century, those are some epics, you know what I'm saying? They're working on epic structures. They're basically epic ballads. So they're a lot about people who are down on their luck and it's just getting worse. It's just getting worse. But you know what? They have their pride, and that's all that matters. So that was definitely, I was listening to a lot of Johnny Cash while writing this. And a lot of, this is embarrassing, a lot of classical music.
No, I love classical
I
music.
love classical music. And I love
classical. I also love like Will the Circle Be Unbroken, like that type of country gets my gears going.
I love electronic music, especially like experimental, like because it's basically the classical of our time. It's like contemporary classical where we're sort of working with compositional methods that are really quite complicated. So I was looking at, you know, some albums for structural inspiration, and like artists like Terry Riley or Brian Eno were really interesting to me at the time when I was writing this.
Amazing. Well, this was a feat. We're slightly over time. I'm so grateful to you, Molly, and to this book. Everyone give it up for Molly McGhee.
Thanks, guys.
Give it up for our organizers. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you to the New York Public Library. And that's all I got.
I'll call Eric Adams if you guys call Eric Adams.
Yeah. Save the library.
We'll just call him.
Fuck these budget cuts.
Cool.
But
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for coming.